AWF, who is one of the co-moderators in my opinion, as well as one of the main watchers of the @RalphAsal Twitter page, which is named Rally for Princess Sally Acorn, recently brought up something that you could probably see it here on the screen as you're listening to this, as well as read it, that really got me thinking. Now, even though I've talked about this before, it got me thinking, once again about this possibly being a possibility that was considered. And what he brought up was the fact that, as you could read on the screen, that even though Sally and Nicole weren't officially in any kind of romantic relationship with each other, that there was a mightily fine opportunity for them to be in a relationship. But what did he mean by that? Well, let's discuss it. Now, I think what AWF is getting at is the fact that he feels that with all the visual evidence, shown to us that we saw while we were reading the comics, post Soft Reboot, Soft Retcon, which was post, issue 252, that pretty much, along with the dialogue to accompany it, that there was just too much evidence, for it to be ignored, and that there was too much evidence for the opportunity not to be capitalized on to have Sally and Nicole become more than just BFFs, or be BFFs with a strong bond. And in a way, he's kind of right, especially when you look at the 4-part miniseries from Sonic Universe, Spark of Life. There is a lot of evidence there. Even though Spark of Life was used as an extensive, expanded origin story for Nicole and how she came to be and where she came from, it was also used as a way to argue the fact, from a continuity storyline perspective, that Nicole had evolved from just being a simple AI to being something more. That she had become pretty much human. She had pretty much become a Lynx. She was pretty much flesh and blood. Anytime she constituted her body, she was now flesh and blood. She wasn't just, artificial anymore. She was real. She was like, me and you. She could be hurt, she could be damaged, whatever the case may be. Emotionally and physically. And we saw that even in the pre-Soft Reboot, Soft Retcon run of the books. But when you get back to the post version, though, I think what AWF is getting at, as I said, is that when you look at all the visual moments, presented to us in the book, as well as along with the dialogue, that there was just too much there to be ignored. And that there was an opportunity throughout all that to be capitalized on, and they never did. But why? Why didn't they capitalize on it? Well, I think honestly the reason they didn't do it is because of the fact that Ian Flynn, even though Ian Flynn himself had said in a Bumblecast podcast that it was considered to put Sally and Nicole together before it was shelved, either by their own accord or by being shut down by the higher-ups, Ian Flynn had basically said that there were plans to go that route. But at the same time, Ian Flynn had also said that he wanted to get away from the shipping wars. He didn't want to be involved with that anymore. He wanted to basically focus on making the comic, as good as it could be from a storyline perspective. And that was it. And that is and as much as I may not agree with Ian a lot, that is a pretty good directive to go in. Pretty much a good directive to go in, especially if you don't want no distractions. So, honestly, I think that's part of the reason that they didn't capitalize on it, because of the fact that they didn't want to have any distractions from the main story, in my opinion. But with all the visual evidence, as well as dialogue-wise to go along with it, I do agree there was an opportunity that could have been capitalized on, and unfortunately it wasn't. Even though, as AWF is pretty much pointing out, there was, just by saying what he says here, there's pretty much a lot going in that, going in that directive to make it happen. Now, here's the thing, though. Whenever this is brought up, there's always going to be arguments, and maybe that's another reason Ian Flynn decided to go against it, whether of his own accord, if it was, maybe that's one of the reasons he decided to go against it, because as he mentioned, he wanted to get away from the shipping situation, and maybe by not going the route of Nicole and Sally, if it was of his own accord not to do it, maybe it's because he wanted to avoid any arguments with fans. Because even when this is brought up now, as a basically, a behind the scenes, information of something that was considered as an idea, for the comics, there are fans that argue the fact that, why would you take Sally away from Sonic as a love interest and put her with an artificial intelligence like Nicole, even though, as I mentioned earlier, the Spark of Life miniseries was pretty much made to, not just be an extensive expansion of her origin, but also, showcase that she had evolved into something more, even though it was made to kind of, argue that fact, if you will, down the line. There are still fans, even when it's mentioned, like I said today, that pretty much feel that it was pretty much a ridiculous idea to consider or even think about, because again, why would you take Sally from Sonic and put her with Nicole? Why would you suddenly take Sally and make her from a straight tomboy of a princess into an LGBTQ lesbian princess? It just didn't make sense to them, because to them, Sally was never created to be that kind of a character. Never once. But yet here was an opportunity for that to become a reality, and maybe that's what he wanted to avoid. Maybe he didn't want fans, basically hijacking Archie Comics or hijacking his email account or his Facebook or his MySpace or his Twitter, and basically saying to him, or basically throwing shade at him and saying, why did you do this? It don't make sense. This is stupid. Sally was never a lesbian and all that. No, Nicole's an AI. Why would you do that? Maybe that's why Ian Flynn, if it was his own decision, of his own accord, if you will, maybe that's why he decided not to go that route. And if so, it was probably a smart move on his part. But surprisingly, when you bring it up, there are some fans that support both couples. They support Sonic and Sally, as well as they support Sally and Nicole. And why? Because basically, they do agree that if, you want to basically make Sonic a solo guy, he doesn't have, and that from a personality and story perspective, he doesn't have time for romance, then giving Sally to Nicole and that being, a couple to kind of fall back on, that worked for us too. That works for us too, because they basically, like Sonic, they work with each other. They basically match up chemistry-wise with each other. And it makes sense, if you will. But what's surprising, though, is when you look at maybe these ships, basically, as to who Sally should be with and who Nicole should be with. Sally's like the number one for Nicole. Second behind Sally for Nicole is Tails, believe it or not. But anyway, not to make this video long or anything, this audio video that is. But anyway, when you really get down to it, AWF does have a point. The thing is, there's obviously too much visual evidence and too much dialogue to go with it that pretty much planted the seeds and implied that there was something more between Sally and Nicole post soft reboot retcon, post issue 252, and the same goes for even post. Even what I'm trying to say is the same goes for soft reboot retcon, issue 252. That there was not as much in the post era, but there was enough, just a little bit, in the pre-era that would indicate that there was something beyond friendship between the two. So, who's to say what would have happened? I mean, had this, decision been made into a reality, I'm trying to say, had this decision been made into a reality, who's to say? Would have helped salvage the book, kind of save it, and have it, continuously be published by Archie even to this day because, oh, look, two of our main characters are an LGBTQ lesbian couple, and hey, this shows that we support LGBTQ pride. Who knows? No, not one person can say. Not one person can come out and say, yeah, that would have happened. That would have done it. No one can say. No one can say. But I will tell you this. Like I said, AWF does have a point. Because being a longtime fan myself, being a longtime subscriber since issue 72, I can tell you honestly that out of all the visual evidence that would indicate something beyond friendship between characters, something that was potentially romantical, I could tell you honestly, without a shadow of a doubt, that with all the evidence that was building up to Sonic and Sally being back together after the Iron Dominion arc, if you will, and even before that, with all the evidence being showcased, the seeds being planted and implied, that there was not another romantic evidence, planted, seed planted, I should say, or implied, more so besides that of Sonic and Sally getting back together around that time than what I saw with Sally and Nicole. I will admit that. Because again, when you look at post-Iron Dominion arc, when you look at that, there is no doubt, even before it, even before the Iron Dominion arc in a way, and afterwards, there was too much evidence being planted, seed planted, if you will, and implied that these two were going to get back together. There was too much. And eventually it did happen. It led to it happening. But along with it, I can't think of any other, seed planting or implication of romance between two characters being evident visually and dialogue wise than what I saw in the post 252 post soft retcon reboot of the comic between Sally and Nicole. So I will say that what AWF is getting at, they do have a point. AWF does have a point. But what do you guys think? Do you think maybe we're just making little of nothing? Or do you think maybe, there is a point to what AWF has to say? And do you think maybe, from my opinion, do you think perhaps, I have a point in some of the stuff I brought up on it? For it not happening from a behind-the-scenes standpoint to potentially it, happening, or could have been happening because based on what we all saw in the comics. Let me know what your thoughts are down below, as well as in the live chat during the premiere. I do apologize if I sound like I was rambling and all that. I was trying to say what I was going to say because, of course, when you do things off script or without a script or something like that, bullet points, whatever, you kind of got to rely on what comes to your mind, first and foremost. But let me know what you guys think. Comment down below. I'd love to hear from each and every one of you, as well as let me know what your thoughts are in the live chat during the premiere of this, and I will talk to you all later.